Good day everyone and welcome to another tutorial. Today we will be looking at smoke and fire, just like what you can see here. Now this is obviously in 2.8 Eevee and it certainly does take a little bit to put it together, but I'm going to run you guys through it as quickly as possible without trying to skip on the details. So just to share what the fire alone looks like. It's not as hard as it looks to put this together. So yeah, let's get into it. So with a new project, we have a little floor plane. This is just my default project. So what you can do is you can just add a cylinder. This will be the fire. Just gonna put it nice and use edit mode and put it nice and on top. You want to use your scaling and whatever to adjust it later. So delete the top face, faces, and just delete the top face. Now select a few points, try to be as even as possible, just a few, and then use proportional editing set to random to just create a little bit of a, you know, if you crunched paper together, a cylinder made of paper together, this is the kind of look that you would get. So just push that together and then select the whole thing and shrink that as well, so that you have this kind of like almost completely cone but not entirely kind of shape. Now just add a real bunch of subdivisions there, as many as you are comfortable with, but a solid amount. Okay, that is good. Now tab out, make sure you go object and smooth, shade smooth, and add an empty. This empty will be exclusively for pulling a cloud texture through the cone, and that gives us the fire movement and shape. So just add an empty, doesn't matter what shape you use. Okay, and let's animate it. I'm going to just use the auto feature. Make sure you pull it up, not down, so that happens. Also, don't forget to go into your graph editor and do the usual. Set it to vector and extrapolate so that it continues moving even after your keyframes. Now the reason you use vector, again, is just to make sure that the motion is consistent, that it doesn't slow down or speed up or whatever. If you want to do that, that's fine, but in this instance, we just want it to flow properly. Okay, that looks really, really nice. So in our modifiers, we add a displacement modifier. The displacement modifier is obviously going to create that effect. Create new, call this texture fire. Go into settings, make sure you set it to clouds. The default is really fine, honestly. Just make sure you go back and set the texture coordinates to object and select that empty right there. So if you look at it right now, you'll see that that happens, which is not exactly what we're looking for. So you can do one of two things. You can either scale your texture or you can scale the empty. If you want to scale the empty, just make sure you remove the keyframes for scale. And now you can scale it freely. I think that will do. We just want it to be a little bit faster. So just move the keyframe to a point where you're comfortable with the speed that it moves at. I want it to move fairly quick. I think that will do the trick, just a little bit faster. Yeah, something like that. That's really cool. Okay, now obviously fire at the bottom is generally static, depending on what the source is. If it's a gas fire, it can wobble at the bottom, but for a normal fire like this, it's actually supposed to be quite stable at the bottom instead of wobbling around like that. So I don't recommend stopping it completely, but I do recommend reducing it. Now, if you want to reduce it, just turn off the modifier for a quick second and use weight painting. So just go into weight paint mode and make sure that it doesn't just cover the front faces, and that where is that? This feature is also turned on so you can see through the object. So we're going to add a new vertex group, and we're going to call this influence. And we're going to paint, yeah, I just want to reduce the strength. You know, let's paint the top with 100%. Let's just check. Yeah, you see, it's not painting the backside. I hate it when it does that. For some reason, the transparency feature doesn't quite work. It's one of those things. I don't know why. It's also very difficult to see. I think the old way was better, honestly. Now, I'm not dogging on the developers in any way, shape, or form. I really think their work is awesome. I certainly want to be able to code, but the little coding knowledge I have is not going to help me much. Okay, I think that looks good. So let's just give it a slight reduction in strength, and let's just give some weight at the bottom so that it's not completely static. Fire is, as weird as it sounds, quite organic. Okay. One thing to note about fire specifically in anime is that it's never just one way. Fire looks so many different ways if you look at various shows and whatever. It's very rare for I don't know, for it all to look the same. I don't know exactly how to put it. It's generally two-tone, which is either red and yellow or orange and yellow. It rarely has smoke, actually. Usually when you see smoke, it's only when there's like an explosion or something, and then there's usually not much fire attached to it. So it varies. It really, really does. Okay, so I think this looks really, really cool. Now we need to add a shader to it. Okay, just need to make sure we can see it. Call this one fire. And let's delete this thing because it's just way too heavy. It's just over the top. Okay, so what I like to use in this instance is a Fresnel with a color ramp, not a black body, and what's it called? An emission shader. There we go. Ugh, one of those days. Okay, so let's just put that in there and make this rendered view. Okay, so there we go. So here is how we set up our two-tone. You can decide how thick you want it to be. I kind of like that. That looks really cool. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so this one is going to be the darker color, which you can choose between red or orange. It's your prerogative. It's your fire. And this one I'm going to make a orangey yellow, something like that. And that looks really cool. Now we obviously need transparency. So before we even get to a transparency shader, we're going to just send the blend mode, set it to alpha blend, and the shadow mode we can set to clip because it is going to be a harsh shadow type situation, so it's just snappier. Okay, so we can add a gradient texture. Now the reason we're using a gradient texture is because we're going to use a noise texture with it and a math node that says everything above a certain value has to be white and everything below a certain value has to be black. And this gives us that breakup for the flames. So we just need to set this in here for a second so we can focus on that. Press Ctrl T if you have Node Wrangler enabled, and that gives you coordinates like this. In this case, you can stick with generated, but we are going to be using object for the flame breakup texture as well. Okay, so I'm kind of happy with that. I just want to make sure I rotate it correctly. See, that's really nice. And that's going to determine our fire. So I just want to set a good value, something like that. Okay, I do want to just stretch that out a bit. Okay, so we now add a noise texture. Let me just get a noise texture. It'll help if I'm in the right category. And do the same, Control T. In this case, we're going to be adding an empty. I like to use different shapes just to distinguish everything. It really does help. Yes, that looks so weird. Anyway, let's call this empty. Empty. Let's call this flame coordinates. What did I call the other one? Let's call the other one fire movement. Okay, I like that. Okay, so flame coordinates. We can select it. Okay, and let's set up a basic setup here. Okay, so you have to make sure it's on object, basic thing here. We do want it to be a little bit stronger, and we want to get a converter math node. Now you can choose less than or greater than. It's totally up to you. Just make sure that your flames are pointing in the right direction. So I'm going to just start with less than and see if it's correct. Yeah, we can work with that, but I do want it to be the opposite. So let's, yeah, that's better. Okay. So if you're happy with something like this, that's good. Just make sure you stretch it a little bit out. So in this case, I'm going to just stretch my empty. It's the fastest way to get the right look I'm going for. Okay, that's nice. So let's just scale it up. I don't want it to be too small or too big. And now we want to move it. So just like that. And we're going to move this one. Let's see which one looks better. Up movement looks better. Okay. Again, graph editor, same as with the other one, V, vector, and extrapolation. Let me just show you what the extrapolation does. You see what happens if it's vector? It goes, it stops. Look at this. Boom, and then it stops. You don't want that. So just go extrapolation and linear. And that gives you a nice movement. Look at that. The flames are alive. So anyway, go back to your shader. And this is where you have to adjust it to make sure that it responds the way you want it to respond. I want the flames to almost reach the bottom, but not completely, because I want it to look rather large. So as you can see, that looks really cool. Okay, I'm very happy with that. I do think we can stretch it upwards a little bit more. How does that look? Just so we have some sort of suggestion of flames, you know, kind of licking off the main body, and that looks really, really nice. Okay, so this is going to be our factor for our mix shader. So just pop that in there, set the color back in there, and we have to put one in there, and we have to get a transparent, oh, let's just switch this around. And we have to get a transparent shader. Thankfully, the shader itself is not transparent. Okay, so that's what that's going to be looking like. Yes, that looks amazing. Ah, absolutely love it. Okay, so now to create our smoke. There are very many ways to create smoke. You can use the smoke simulator to create smoke. See my tutorial on text on fire. You can use a cylinder that you rig. You can use metaballs. I'm not crazy about the metaball approach because it needs a ridiculously high resolution, and then it kind of looks the same as particles, which is what we're going to be using in this tutorial. So to create the right particle shape, all you need to do is get a round cube, not too high detail. In fact, get by with the lowest detail possible. Okay, I think that's good. Let's just minimize that again, move that into a space where I can actually see it. Again, object smooth. And let's just move this above. Okay, now go into edit mode and just, you don't have to do this in edit mode. You can do this without and then join it, but whatever. Just Shift D and move it out. You just want to create, oh, portion editing has to be turned off. And just create this weird kind of bubble shape. Just move this out a little bit. I'm going to time lapse everything that's a little tedious because I don't think that it adds anything. I just want to be smart about it. Okay, so that's our particle. Now we do want to simplify the normals, and I'm going to show you later what the difference looks like. So what you can do here is add a UV sphere or another round cube, doesn't matter. Just make sure it goes to the exact same location. So you can use Shift S, cursor to selected, and then you get your selection and set that to the cursor. Also Shift S. And just scale it up so that it covers the whole thing. Object, shade smooth, and then call this one normal change. Just want to delete these keyframes. Ooh-wee. It's a very useful feature, but if you forget it on, it's really annoying. Let me just see if the other one actually has anything on it. Yeah, of course it does. Of course it does. So let's just delete those. Okay. So with this object selected, we change it to smoke particle normal edit. And the other one is simply smoke particle. You can also call it particle smoke. It just depends on how big your scene is. Okay, so with our smoke particle selected, we have to set it to auto smooth, which is under normals, under your what's this thing called? Context object data. Set it to auto smooth. I don't know if the angle needs to change. I don't know. I don't care. So go into your modifiers, normal edit, and select the normal edit for the particles, and you can just leave it at 100%. So what this looks like, if you remove the normal edit, just make sure you parent it to the smoke particle so that it moves with it. Okay. So then you can hide it. You don't need to see that, so just erase it from the render as well. Okay, see, that's what it does to it. Totally different approach. So I'm just going to set it to smooth again, because it looks like, no, it's just the reaction of the normals. Okay, whatever. Okay, so I created a toon shader short while back. It's more like an NPR shader because it can do smooth shading as well. I recommend you use that, link in the description, because I'm going to be using it here. It just, I don't know, it just helps me get the result I'm looking for. So if you want to just use a color ramp and a diffuse node with the shader to RGB and emission, whatever, you can do that. I'm going to be using the other one. So I'm just going to go into my shader editor and append it and take it from there. Do remember to save often. Okay, obviously the particle is not going to be blue. So I'm just going to quickly configure it. I want it to be like this. Yeah, something like that, and just darker. Ach, not. There we go. Just. Okay, let's just start with this. Let's just start with that. Okay, so I'm going to move this below the surface so that we don't need to see it. And I'm going to change my lamp to a sun. Okay, that's cool. Let's see if we can actually see some shadows going there. No, we cannot. It's because its clipping distance is way too short, but it's set to 30 meters. Why can't I see it? How weird is that? Anyway, moving on. So we're going to add an emitter. You can use a circle or a plane. I'm going to adjust the plane anyway, just so that it's a little bit more circular. Something like that. Okay. And we are going to have to make it transparent. For some reason, it still shows up, even if you say you don't want to see the emitter. So I'm going to say emitter matte. And we're just going to make it a transparent shadow. There we go. We'll deal with the alpha-ness in a second. Just want to set its location to 0. Okay, obviously it needs to be a little bit smaller than the fire. Something like that. And you can leave it below the fire if you want to, but smoke doesn't really originate at the fire source. Maybe it does, I don't know, it just never looks like that. It kind of looks like it bleeds out of the points of the flames. So it just looks weird when I put it at the absolute bottom of the fire. Okay, that's fine. So let's get to the particles themselves. Add a new particle system. I used about 3,000, roughly. We're not going to be using a halo. We're going to be using an object, and our object is this one. So let's just select it. And that looks good. Obviously, we don't want it to show the emitter, but for some reason it still does. Okay, that's obviously a problem. It's under our physics. There we go. And it's under field weights. I basically turn off gravity. And I wanted to kind of go like in a diagonal direction. So it's up to you how diagonal you want it to be. I like upping the normals and just setting my X and my Y. So let's make this one 2 and then these 0.5. See, whenever you do a tutorial, you have to kind of re-troubleshoot some things. Oh, there is a shadow. Look at that. There is a shadow. It's just a little too low resolution and too soft. But there is one. Okay, that's really nice. Okay, I like that. I do think it's going in the wrong direction. It's not supposed to go towards the camera. It's supposed to go away from the camera. So let's just use the X and go minus 0.5. And see what that does. Yep, that's perfect. Okay, so with that, we need to add a texture to it, and then we're going to scale it up. So under textures, add a new one, and click on this little button here to change its properties. Make sure it's a cloud, no, not a cloud texture, a blend texture. Ooh, gradient blend, there we go. And it's supposed to be to the particles, and it's supposed to only influence their size. As you can see, it's already effective. So instead of influence, we're going to go to colors and set ramp. Make everything opaque, it's just easier to work with. Add another one and just slide it down. We do want it to kind of quickly grow. It has to grow like really, really fast to its almost full size. Something like that. And now we need to just boost, of course, the size and randomness. So that you can also find under the render stuff, up the scale, randomness, something like that. You can scale the emitter down a little bit if you want to. See what that looks like. Okay, that's good. We do need Brownian noise as well. So I set that to 1 generally. It just kind of makes the smoke expand as it goes. It gives randomness to the direction. I want to set it to a good value. Just see what it looks like in camera. Yeah, I like that. That looks really, really nice. Let's just move the camera a little bit though. That's our camera view. So let's just go Y, rotate it, again Y, and take it down a little bit, just so we see something like that. Okay, that looks really, really cool. So we also want to add some rotation to it. Of course, you want it to be random, and you want a random phase, and you want it to be dynamic. Okay, just going on a side tangent here. After the tutorial finished, I noticed that the particles were not rotating the way that they were supposed to. So this is just a quick add-in to just make them actually turn. So if you select your system, particle system, you free the bake, obviously, and under your rotation, you have to give it some angular velocity. So let's just try something interesting. Yeah, not too heavy. Want it to turn somewhat, so let's try 1.5. I like 1.5. Yeah, that should be interesting. Okay, so just remember to do this angular velocity so that it actually does turn. Something like that. That looks really, really cool. Okay, so I'm going to change the direction of the sun because it's not really giving me the kind of look I'm going for. Yeah, that looks really, really cool. If you want to increase the detail of the flame wobble at the bottom, you can do that by going into the shader and adding a noise texture and setting it to that same empty, and that will give you a little bit more detail. Pick that and go shader. We want to pick, see, we're gonna have to use displacement. That's fine. We have to use displacement, we have to use displacement. So let's just get a noise texture. If you want to, you can use the same noise texture as the breakup. I don't think you should, if I'm perfectly honest. So let's just go Control T and select object, and we want the fire movement. Okay, so let's just see what that looks like. Okay. Yeah, that looks like it will definitely add some interest. It really, really does. Okay, so we're going to be using a bump. It should be under vector. There we go. What in the world? Just changed my node. That is not what I wanted. Goodness, 2.8 is really, wow, sometimes. Okay, so height and displacement. I wonder if it's going to affect it actually. And now, of course, we just switch back to the color. It doesn't seem to be affecting it. Crap. Hold on. Oh, color does. Okay, that's good. Color does. That's the only thing I don't like about it, is it creates this blocky kind of feel. So just reduce the strength a little bit. Fine, we'll reduce it a different way. If it's going to be difficult, we'll just deal with it. Goodness. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, now. I definitely want to create a bit of a, what's the word? I want it to break up a little bit more. Oh, here we go. That's why. I have to add a little bit of randomness to the velocity. So let's just go back. Okay, it does break up a little bit more. Just, okay, that's a bit much. Let's go for 0.2. No, 0.2 is fine. Okay, we can also randomize our scale a little bit more. Scale it up. Okay, let's just see what that looks like without that. That looks really, really cool. Doesn't have as much definition as I would like it to, and we're going to be dealing with that in a second. We really are. So go to your particle and add a Fresnel. So let's just get an emission shader going here so that we actually have something to see. That looks cool. And of course we want a color ramp. Let's just strengthen it. Something like that. And then we can just use an add shader. Add shader like that. Add that together. And then add a mix shader to take it down back to our normal color. Just so that it's a little bit more controlled. Yeah, something like that. That looks really nice. Okay. Can actually see what it looks like when we up it. I don't know. I'm not crazy about it, but actually, you know what? That looks really cool. Let's keep it. Let's keep it. Okay, now obviously when you have smoke going like this, you do have some light influence on the smoke itself. Now this is where you can stop here if you're happy, but I kind of can't just leave it alone. So I'm going to add another empty, and this one is going to be for coordinates. In other words, it's not going to be moving or whatever like that. This is going to be like a mapping coordinate. So just set it to a nice comfortable point, and take it to a place where you can actually see it, because you have to be able to move it and adjust it however is needed. So then you have to select your smoke particle again and go back into the shader editor, and this is where you add another gradient texture. The gradient texture is going to give us that light influence, and again we're going to be breaking it up but in a different way. So you can use, okay, I have to use use Control T because we haven't selected anything yet, and select that empty. Let's just name it Fire Light Influence. I've tried using a point lamp to do this, but even when you turn shadows off, it looks weird. So you can add one to create a light around the fire, you know, turning shadows off, but it's not going to give you the effect that you want. It's just not. Without the ability to mask and blur and all that kind of stuff, Eevee is just not set up for that kind of stuff. Select the smoke particle. Just press home if it seems like everything has disappeared. Okay, now we need to again focus only on an emission shader. So just get one. We're going to be adding this as well, so don't worry about it. Okay, that's interesting. And this is why we use object instead of simply using the other stuff. Okay, so again, 90 degrees. That's perfect. We just want to, I just want to stretch it a little bit, you know, something like that. Okay. Smoke particle. Let's just call this one emitter smoke. It's technically better to name the type at the front so that when you have like really, really big scenes, there's no confusion. Just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to bake the particles. Okay. And go back to the smoke particle. Okay, this is fairly simple. All we need to do is add a noise texture. Noise texture, there we go. And if you want to, you can connect it here, but I'm going to connect it to one of the other objects that actually moves. So I'm going to press Ctrl T. Okay, so let's see. I think let's use fire movement. Let's use fire movement. Okay, let's just check that out. It should be fine. Yeah, that looks really cool. Okay, it moves nice and fast. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to distort our gradient texture using this exact texture. So we're going to be using color instead of the factor. And this is what it does. Just give it a few seconds. Okay. Look at that. So I'm just going to reduce this a little bit because it's way too intense. Okay. Now when I add color, you'll see an even greater difference. Look at that. It just makes it an uneven gradient, because if it's too flat, it honestly looks flat. It really, really does. So I just want to make the texture a little bit smaller, you know, finer. Yeah, something like that. Look at that. Much nicer. Okay. So we're going to start with yellow. Preferably the same orangey yellow. Or maybe a little bit lighter. It's totally up to you. It really is. Okay, and then we want to go to an orange or a red. And then it goes to black. Let's try using this spleen, whatever you want to pronounce it. I think that looks better. Hey, that looks 1,000 times better. Okay, let's use that. Okay, so simply take a shader, add shader, or you can use an influence. You can just color this thing to create a mask if you want to. But I'm going to just use an add shader. And that should be cool. Let's just see. Yeah, I think that looks really nice. We just need to darken our smoke a little bit. Our smoke is just too bright. So something like that. That gives a little bit more color to our smoke. Yeah, that looks really, really cool. Yeah, that's where it stops. It stops at 250. Actually 200. Wow. So a quick trick with particle systems that you might not be aware of. Since the fire is already going, we want the smoke to be already like at full force. So if you see it's full force at like, I don't know, 75 frames or whatever, then you start at minus 75. Okay, so just clear the bake. And you start minus 75 and you stop at 300, not 30, 300. Give it a good lifetime. I think leaving it at 50 is fine. We do need a little bit more, so I'm going to say like 4,000. And then I'm going to bake with a frame range of 300, and then I'm going to just reduce the frame range. So back to 250, and just deselect it, so that when you start, it's already going. And of course you can make this a little bit more interesting by removing the overlays. Oh, okay, it seems my light is too bright. Yeah, see, there's the problem. We have found the problem. Yes, yes we have. So let's just make it nice and brown. And that means the smoke is probably going to be too dark as well. So let's get that fixed as well. Where is that emitter? Actually, the smoke looks pretty cool. The only thing I would change is I would probably remove the softness and work a little bit on that Fresnel effect. And what I also want to show you guys is the effect of the normal editing. I want to reduce it a bit because I can see it creates some weird artifacts. Just a little bit like that. So if you turn it off completely, this is what it looks like. I don't like this. It just looks like bubbles. It has to be somewhat simplified. So giving it about 0.5 should be good. Yeah, I like that. That looks really, really nice. Okay, so let's do something with the background. This is just some fun. So I'm not going to do much with it. I'm just going to give it a color, but I don't want the color to influence the flames. So how you do that is you just use a light path node. If you don't know already, I'm just adding this as an extra. And you use a mix shader, camera array, use another background. One will be color, one will be like environment color, environment lighting, whatever. So let me show you what that does. So take a color, not mix RGB, input RGB, something like that. And then you can pick a color, but you can see it's not influencing my scene. However, if I take this one, it does influence my scene. Something like that. That looks really nice. Okay, let's just do something with this. Okay. And we're going to, just for the sake of it, add a light, a point light, where the fire is at. Just need to turn on my overlay so I can actually see it. Okay. It's at the 3D cursor. We don't want it there. We want it just above the plane. Okay, and we don't want shadows on it. Okay, that looks so cool. We just want to take the sun lamp. You can see where they kind of stop. So I think we can fix that with, we can make it transparent. Not crazy about that idea. I think we would do better to just shrink them down. Just shrink them down. So go to particles and the texture and just make them fade to black. And that should make them disappear. That's a little bit smoother. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. We want the sun lamp to just extend that and kind of put it out of the camera view and give the smoke a little bit more definition. So I think depending on how far it goes, we should be able to get away with some. Okay, that looks really cool. I want the smoke to be more defined. Yeah, I think that's cool. With the refresh rate, it just looks a little bit smudgy, for lack of a better term. I don't want it to look smudgy. Okay. I'm just fine-tuning here. You you already get the point. You really do. And that's it, honestly. I'm just, you know, polishing a little bit here. So if you render this, I just set mine to image editor. Just makes more sense. And then hit F12. And that is your result. Smoke and fire. Love it. So I'm going to render this out, and that is it for this video. Have a great one, and God bless you.